Welcome to the debate. When a master bladesmith is finalizing a piece of high-carbon steel, they face a pretty fundamental thermodynamic choice. You have this piece of metal, right? It's glowing cherry red from the forge, and its internal crystalline structure is completely volatile.
Right. It's in a state of extreme stress. It has to be treated really carefully.
Exactly. So do you plunge it directly into a barrel of ice water to instantly shock compress and harden that crystal lattice? Or do you leave it in the ambient warmth of the forge to slowly anneal, relaxing the internal tension so it doesn't fracture? Today, we are turning that metallurgical lens onto human physiology. Because when we look at optimizing our physical recovery, regulating our nervous systems, and, fortifying our mental well-being, we have to ask a big question. Which thermal stressor actually provides the most substantial evidence-based benefits?
Yeah, it's a huge debate right now.
It is. I'll be taking the side of the cold plunge, arguing that the deliberate, acute stress of cold water forces our biology to adapt and grow highly resilient.
And I will be taking the perspective that passive systemic heating through hot baths and showers offers profound physiological remodeling, driving cardiovascular adaptation and true nervous system relaxation without the severe risks of cold shock.
Well, let's lay out the foundation of the cold paradigm first. If you're listening to this and thinking, there is absolutely no way I am getting into a 45-degree tub of ice water, I completely understand.
It sounds awful to most people.
Right? But let's look at exactly what happens in your brain and body the second you do. Cold water exposure operates on the biological principle of hormesis. This is a beneficial, non-harmful stress that forces the organism to adapt. When you submerge in water below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, you trigger this massive, well-documented neurochemical cascade. We see up to a 250% increase in dopamine and a 530% surge in norepinephrine.
And to be clear, that is an enormous spike. That is essentially a pure survival mechanism kicking in, right?
Precisely. Evolutionarily speaking, when you hit freezing water, your brain thinks, we are in mortal danger. You need the drive, the focus, and the energy to get out of this water and find the fire immediately. It gives you the neurochemical tools to do so.
Wow, yeah.
But what's fascinating is that this isn't just a fleeting rush. That neurochemical elevation sustains your mood, focus, and mental acuity for hours after you've dried off. And beyond the brain, the immune benefits are staggering. Empirical data shows that participants who simply switch to daily cold showers call out sick from work 29% less often.
Sure, and that statistic always grabs headlines. But while the acute shock of cold gets all the sensational press, passive heat therapy provides systemic benefits that cold exposure simply cannot match.
I don't know if I'd say cannot match, but go on.
Well, think about it. When you immerse your body in water between 100 and 104 degrees Fahrenheit, you aren't fighting for survival. You are signaling safety. Raising the core body temperature triggers massive vasodilation.
Meaning the blood vessels are opening up?
Exactly. Think of your blood vessels like a multi-lane highway during rush hour. Cold water essentially shuts down 2 lanes to force traffic to the center. Heat, on the other hand, adds 3 new lanes to the highway.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right? It physically relaxes the muscle fibers and clears the congestion by expanding the road. This lowers blood pressure, it significantly reduces arterial stiffness, and improves endothelial function. In fact, on a vascular level, passive heating functions almost as an alternative to moderate-intensity exercise.
Alternative might be a strong word there.
But crucially, hot water actively engages the parasympathetic nervous system. It lowers cortisol. We are living through a modern epidemic of chronic sympathetic overactivity. Everyone is stressed, anxious, and sleeping poorly.
Yeah, that's undeniably true.
So the solution to a chronically stressed nervous system is not to assault it with severe cold shock. The solution is the deep, restorative downregulation provided by systemic heat.
Look, I hear you on the cortisol reduction, but aren't we kind of missing the forest for the trees here? If you're just using heat to actively hide from stress, you aren't building the biological hardware to actually deal with it next time.
Hiding from stress?
Well, yeah. Let's look closer at how these temperature extremes manipulate our neurochemistry. When you submerge in cold water, your sympathetic nervous system screams fight or flight. You want to panic. You want to gasp.
Which is a terrible feeling.
But by controlling your breathing and staying in the water, you are actively training the vagus nerve. You are teaching your nervous system to maintain top-down executive control while under severe physiological duress. I view cold exposure as a neurological reset button.
A reset button. Okay.
Yeah, it instantly clears cognitive static because your brain is forced to process an immediate survival-level stimulus. I see why you value the relaxation of heat, but does the passive relaxation of heat truly build the physiological resilience required to manage acute external stress in the way cold shock does?
Well, I understand the appeal of the reset button concept, but we have to look critically at what is actually happening in those studies. You are attributing structural neurological changes to what is frankly, very likely, a massive expectancy effect.
Wait, you think the dopamine spike is just placebo?
Let me finish. In these cold water studies, there is absolutely no blinding. You can't give someone a placebo ice bath. Participants know they're jumping into freezing water, and they usually have preconceived notions that it's going to make them feel amazing.
But the blood work confirms the neurochemical shift. You can't fake norepinephrine.
The blood work confirms a shift, yes, but how much of the lasting mood-boosting effect is the pure physiological mechanism of cold, and how much is simply the psychological triumph of overcoming intense voluntary discomfort? If you do something incredibly hard first thing in the morning, of course you feel a psychological win. Furthermore, if we are talking about mental health, we have to look at the baseline state of the individual. For someone with high anxiety, a panic disorder, or PTSD, their nervous system is already redlining.
Right.
Throwing them into an ice bath can actually exacerbate their symptoms. It reinforces a state of hypervigilance.
But doesn't avoiding stress altogether just leave them vulnerable? I mean, you have to upgrade the hardware eventually.
Upgrading the hardware doesn't solely mean preparing for battle. Resilience is also the capacity to fully power down and repair. Hot water doesn't require a placebo effect or a psychological triumph to work.
True.
It directly facilitates vasodilation and muscle relaxation, which sends an afferent signal back up to the brain that the environment is safe. This directly lowers cortisol and facilitates deep sleep. As core body temperature artificially rises in a hot bath, it rapidly drops when you get out, which is the exact biological trigger the brain needs to initiate deep, slow-wave sleep.
Oh, the temperature drop trick for sleep.
Exactly. And deep sleep is the actual biological foundation of mental health and resilience.
Okay, but that neurological reset doesn't happen in a vacuum, though. The brain is signaling the rest of the body, and the most immediate visceral reaction we see is in the blood vessels. This is exactly where the debate over physical recovery really heats up, pun intended.
Naturally.
I argue that cold water is the ultimate physical recovery tool because of cold-induced vasoconstriction. When you hit cold water, the peripheral blood vessels in your arms and legs clamp down. It acts like a massive vascular sponge.
Right, forcing blood away from the skin.
Violently squeezing it away from the extremities and driving it into the core, protecting your vital organs.
And in the core, it's gathering oxygen.
Yes, it's being highly oxygenated and nutrient-enriched by the internal organs. Upon exiting the cold and rewarming, those vessels vasodilate. That sponge expands, and that nutrient-rich blood rushes back into the peripheral tissues, forcefully flushing out the inflammatory cytokines and metabolic waste that cause delayed onset muscle soreness. It is a highly active, dynamic mechanical flush.
It is dynamic, I'll give you that. But I come at it from a different way, primarily because we have to look at the long-term remodeling of the cardiovascular system, not just the acute flush. The profound cardiovascular benefits of passive heating are undeniable.
In what sense?
Well, when you immerse yourself in hot water, your cardiac output naturally increases to pump blood to the skin to dissipate the heat. This creates shear stress, a healthy mechanical friction along the endothelial walls of your blood vessels, which triggers the nitric oxide release.
Exactly. That shear stress stimulates the release of nitric oxide, which tells the blood vessels to relax and widen. Over time, this increases flow-mediated dilation. It actually reduces carotid artery wall thickness and increases oxygenated hemoglobin in the tissues permanently, not just in the 10 minutes after you get out of the tub. Heat physically relaxes the muscle fibers and clears congestion by opening the vascular highways rather than forcefully squeezing them shut. You are nurturing the tissue, not wringing it out.
That makes sense in a vacuum, I guess, but let's apply it to a real-world scenario. That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. If a muscle is acutely inflamed from intense physical trauma, say a heavy resistance training session or a grueling run, aren't we just pouring gasoline on the fire by applying heat?
How so?
Well, the tissue is already swollen. It's already experiencing a localized hyperthermic response because of the microscopic damage. Applying passive heat simply drives more fluid into the area, exacerbating edema and swelling. Cold stops the enzymatic breakdown of tissue and blunts the acute inflammatory response when it's spiraling out of control.
Okay, I will concede that for a highly acute, localized injury, a sprained ankle, a torn ligament, cold is an effective analgesic and anti-inflammatory. It numbs the pain and stops excessive swelling.
Right.
But there is a massive caveat here regarding systemic physical recovery, particularly for people who are actively trying to build strength or muscle mass. If you use immediate cold water immersion after strength training, you actively blunt muscle hypertrophy.
You're talking about blunting the localized inflammation.
I'm talking about the macrophages, essentially the body's microscopic cleanup crew. Muscle growth requires a localized inflammatory signal.
Sure.
When you lift heavy weights, you create micro tears in the muscle fibers. Satellite cells and macrophages rely on those inflammatory cytokines to know exactly where to go to clean up the damage and build new, stronger muscle tissue. By jumping into an ice bath and artificially wiping out that inflammation with your vascular sponge, you are silencing the very signal your body needs to adapt and grow stronger.
I see.
Heat doesn't interrupt that signal. Heat supports the delivery of the amino acids required for that repair by keeping those highway lanes wide open.
It is absolutely true that for pure localized muscle hypertrophy, jumping into an ice bath immediately post-workout can blunt the adaptation. If your only goal is massive biceps, wait a few hours before the cold plunge.
Exactly.
But if we zoom out and look at systemic health, we have to consider the boundary where these thermal therapies interface with our bodies, the skin. Having established the powerful internal effects of both modalities, we really need to look at the external barrier and the physiological limits where these therapies transition from therapeutic to genuinely dangerous.
Oh, I imagine you are going to bring up the lipid barrier and skin dryness.
Absolutely, but it's more than just dryness. It's structural degradation. Think of your skin's outermost layer, the stratum corneum, like a brick and mortar wall. The bricks are your skin cells, and the mortar holding them together is a tightly packed matrix of sebum, lipids, and ceramides. Hot water acts as a literal solvent. When you immerse yourself in water over 100 degrees, you are melting and stripping away that protective mortar. It strips the acid mantle.
Which alters the pH.
It severely alters it. It drives the skin's pH toward an alkaline state, which disrupts its natural antimicrobial properties. This leads to what dermatologists call transepidermal water loss. Essentially, the moisture inside your body evaporates right through the compromised barrier,
Leaving it dry.
leaving the skin dry, ashy, and highly prone to exacerbating conditions like eczema and rosacea. Cold water, conversely, smooths the hair cuticles, constricts the pores, and entirely preserves that natural lipid layer. It locks the moisture in.
Well, that is a fair point regarding dermatological health. Hot water does strip oils, but frankly, dry skin, which can easily be remedied with a high-quality moisturizer, pales in comparison to the severe systemic dangers of the cold shock response.
Dangers? Come on.
We cannot talk about the physiological limits of thermal stress without looking at the myocardium, the heart muscle itself. When you plunge into freezing water, that sudden peripheral vasoconstriction you praised earlier causes a massive, instantaneous spike in blood pressure.
Well, yes, temporarily.
The heart is suddenly forced to pump against a brick wall of constricted blood vessels. If a person has underlying cardiovascular disease or even undiagnosed hypertension, the workload on the heart skyrockets dangerously.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because, well, which is exactly why adaptation, gradual exposure, and consulting a physician are required. You don't start at 35 degrees for 20 minutes.
But the risk doesn't end when you simply get out of the water. We have to explain the afterdrop phase.
Oh, the afterdrop.
Yeah. After you exit the cold water, The cold blood from your extremities finally begins to recirculate back to your core. This means your core body temperature actually continues to drop for 10 to 20 minutes after you are standing on dry land. This delayed drop can trigger dangerous ventricular arrhythmias.
That's if you overdo it.
There is also a well-documented phenomenon called autonomic conflict. The cold shock of the water hitting your skin drives sympathetic tachycardia. Your heart rate shoots up as you panic, but if your face goes underwater, it triggers the mammalian dive reflex, which aggressively drives parasympathetic bradycardia, trying to slow your heart rate down to conserve oxygen.
Right, pulling in two directions.
Exactly. Your heart is receiving simultaneous, overwhelming signals to sprint and to stop, which is a physiological recipe for fatal arrhythmias.
I completely acknowledge the acute risks of cold shock, which is why head submersion is often cautioned against for beginners. But while cold has acute, predictable risks that can be heavily mitigated through proper dosing, the insidious risks of heat are heavily documented and deeply disruptive to specific healthy populations.
Disruptive how?
We tend to view hot baths as entirely benign, but heat stress is a silent biological disruptor. For instance, the male reproductive system is exceptionally sensitive to heat.
You're referring to spermatogenesis.
Yes, testicular temperature must remain below core body temperature for optimal sperm production. The data clearly shows that regular hot tub use reduces male sperm motility by up to 22%, and it does this through heat-induced apoptosis.
Programmed cell death.
Exactly. The heat is literally signaling the spermatogenic cells to self-destruct. It's not just slowing them down, it's killing them. And beyond male fertility, we have to look at maternal hyperthermia.
Right.
The CDC and obstetric guidelines strictly warn pregnant women against hot tub use, particularly in the first trimester.
Which is due to the teratogenic threat.
Precisely. A teratogen is anything that disrupts fetal development. Raising the maternal core temperature above 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit is directly linked to severe neural tube defects like spina bifida. As the fetal brain and spinal cord are forming, cold water simply does not possess this teratogenic threat.
I think it is incredibly important to contextualize those risks for the listener, though. The teratogenic effects of heat on a developing fetus and the apotopic impacts on spermatogenesis are highly specific to prolonged systemic hyperthermia.
True.
A 10-minute hot shower to wind down before bed does not raise your core body temperature to 102 degrees. But your overarching point absolutely stands. Thermal therapies are not toys. They are powerful, systemic physiological interventions that demand respect. Whether you're dealing with the vasoconstrictive shock of cold or the core heating properties of a hot tub.
They demand tremendous respect, which is why understanding the mechanisms is so vital. To summarize my stance today, cold water immersion provides an unparalleled systemic activation of the human body.
Mm-hmm.
Through the mechanism of acute, controlled stress, it delivers a massive neurochemical upregulation of dopamine and norepinephrine that clears mental static. It forces dynamic vascular flushing that mechanically clears metabolic waste, and it preserves the vital structural integrity of the skin's barrier. It doesn't just soothe, it trains the nervous system. It is the ultimate tool for forging physical and mental resilience in an unpredictable world.
And to summarize the opposing view, hot water immersion offers profound, lasting cardiovascular remodeling without the traumatic shock to the system. By actively dilating the vascular highways, it mimics the endothelial benefits of exercise.
Right.
It facilitates deep, nutrient-driven muscular repair without silencing the inflammatory signals required for hypertrophy. And crucially, it engages the parasympathetic nervous system to counteract the chronic low-grade stress of modern life, paving the way for the deep sleep where true healing occurs. It heals through expansion, not constriction.
Despite our different mechanisms, I believe we share a fundamental point of convergence today. Whether we are discussing the shivering thermogenesis of an ice bath or the heat-induced vasodilation of a hot tub, the biological mechanism at play is hormesis. We are using brief, intentionally controlled environmental stress to force the human organism to adapt, compensate, and ultimately grow stronger.
I completely agree. And understanding that convergence brings up the fascinating synthesis of our two positions, contrast therapy.
Oh yeah, the best of both worlds.
Exactly. By intentionally alternating between hot and cold water, say 3 minutes in the heat, 1 minute in the cold, you theoretically harness the strengths of both modalities. You create a physiological vascular pumping effect. The heat drastically expands the vessels, and the cold forcefully constricts them. This rhythmic expansion and contraction dramatically enhances tissue oxygenation and circulation beyond what either therapy could ever achieve in isolation.
It's essentially a workout for your circulatory system. It highlights the sheer complexity of human thermal regulation. The fact that our bodies can adapt to and actually thrive in such extreme environments is remarkable. But it also suggests that anyone listening must deeply evaluate their own biological baselines before diving in.
Exactly. There is no universal prescription here. You have to ask yourself, what is my baseline cardiovascular health? Am I an athlete trying to maximize muscle hypertrophy, or am I trying to flush out metabolites after an ultramarathon?
Yeah.
Am I battling chronic anxiety and sleep deprivation, or do I need a massive dopaminergic shock to break out of lethargy? The best thermal tool is the one that directly addresses the physiological deficit you are currently experiencing.
Bio-individuality is the ultimate deciding factor. So whether you choose to plunge your steel into the ice to harden it against the world, or let it temper in the warmth to relieve its internal fractures, the choice of the forge is yours. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time on The Debate.